Well, I feel that the way I've done it, and it wasn't a plan, but just the way it turned out, the way I did it was when opportunities came along that were very strong and I was really deeply moved to move in a certain direction, I did. In certain major points in my life, I made some big turns, really big ones, starting when I was very young, a teenager. I started early and I continued to follow rather than to figure everything out. I really didn't try to figure out what would be the best move to make. I just felt so strongly. Later, when I studied these things, I was very interested in what some people might call a kind of internal guidance. I use a very old word, daimon, for that, daimonic living, which means that every once in a while you get a deep urge to move in a certain direction. And I think it's important to follow that urge. And that's what I've done, even though it didn't seem like the smartest thing. That's what I've done. And I've developed now in my life a kind of philosophy that includes that approach.
I read something in The Eloquence of Silence where you said that something to the extent that you made a real effort to be a priest, a musician, and a lecturer, and you ended up being a best-selling author.
Right.
there's something, I guess, in the sense of like even like a feedback with life as well, though, right? Like even an acceptance that failure isn't closure on something or an end. It's almost like an invitation as well.
I think it is. I like the idea of feedback. You get the feedback from outside yourself. And I don't want to be silly about it and talk about some angel talk speaking in my ear. I don't mean it that way. I do mean that there's something, it seems to me, and it's been discussed by interesting people for thousands of years, that there's something almost like a muse for an artist. There's a sense of a presence or a voice or something that is not within you entirely, and yet it does come sometimes as an interior experience, but sometimes it's an exterior one. And so this is what this is what people have talked about. For example, one of the great people who talked about this was W.B. Yeats. Yeats really wrote a great deal about this experience of a presence or some guest who appears, somebody who appears, not a real person, but a presence appears, and gives you the sense of what to do next, and you do that. It's not a really clear message entirely, but it's strong enough for you to go ahead and move along. I've done that. I've made some big life decisions based on those impulses, and I think they have guided me, and they've turned out to be pretty good.
In in your experience, then, is it just the weight of the energy? Is it like is there a clarity to the experience, or how would you kind of describe it?
I would say that it is. There's a certainty, a kind of certainty that is very different from weighing all the pros and cons of your decision. That's
Okay.
a certainty that comes from your head in a way, from your logic and so on. And that can provide a certain kind of certainty. But the certainty that comes from this guidance, I don't know what to call it, the certainty that comes from that is even stronger. So an example, I left home at 13 to study to be a priest, Catholic priest, and I continued that study for 13 years. It was quite a commitment of my life to that. And I was all for it all the way through. But I got up one morning when I was, 13 years later, I was 26. And I woke up and I was certain that I had to leave this now, that this part was over. I never thought it would ever be over, but I knew that at that time. I'm not saying it happened in just a day, but there were things that worked up to it. But that morning, there was that one morning that I was certain, and I was so certain I went right to the person in charge, and I told him, I said, I've got to leave now. And this was really a shock because they had put so much into my being there, and I had, and my family had, and I had a huge amount of pressure to stay where I was. But I was so certain of this change that had come over me and this other direction that was appearing that I had no problem just telling them, I'm gone. This is no longer where I am.